All right, so today we're diving into how to really level up your communication skills at work.
Yeah.
And we're focusing on how to make sure that you're getting your point across clearly
Yeah.
and that you're actually being heard, you know?
And make an impact.
Exactly. And for this deep dive, we're using The First Minute by Chris Fenning as our guide. Have you had a chance to check this one out yet?
I have. It's really good.
It's so good.
Yeah, really practical stuff.
It's packed with these practical techniques. And I was telling you before we started recording, I really wish I'd read this book years ago.
Yeah.
I feel like it would save me so much time and frustration.
It really is a gold mine of insights.
Yeah.
Fenning starts off with this scenario that I think so many of us can relate to. Uh, Picture this. You are heading to lunch,
Hmm.
ready for a break, starving. And suddenly a colleague stops you in the hallway.
Oh, no,
And they
man.
just launch into this 10-minute monologue,
Uh,
only to reveal at the very end that a flagship project is about to miss a critical deadline.
oh my gosh, talk about a mood killer, right? But honestly, who hasn't been in that situation? Either as the person rambling or the poor soul who's stuck listening.
Exactly. And it's not just anecdotal, we've all experienced this. Fenning actually cites some really alarming statistics about the cost of this kind of inefficient communication. One study found that a business with just 100 employees can waste something like 17 hours per week just clarifying communication.
Wow.
That's practically a full work week.
Yeah, that's mind-boggling when you think about all that lost productivity and potential. So where are we going wrong? What are some of the common communication traps that we fall into?
Yeah, Fenning outlines several pitfalls, and I think we've probably all been guilty of these at some point. Um, Not giving enough context, leaving our audience kind of wondering what we're even talking about,
Yeah.
not having a clear purpose for the conversation, which just leads to assumptions and wasted effort.
And then there's the classic blunder of just not getting to the point quickly enough. Just tell me what you need.
Right, and of course those long, rambling summaries that make it impossible to extract the key takeaways.
It's like trying to find a needle in a haystack. But the good news is that the first minute doesn't just diagnose the problem, it actually gives us the tools to fix it. And one of the most powerful weapons in our communication arsenal, according to Fenning, is something called framing.
It's a good one. Think of framing as like creating a movie trailer for your message. You've got about 15 seconds to hook your audience and give them a preview of what's to come. And you do that with three concise sentences: context, intent, and key message.
Okay, that's a way better analogy than setting the stage. So
Mm.
let's break down those components. Context seems pretty straightforward. It's basically establishing what you're talking about, right?
Right. Let's say you need to talk to your manager about a potential delay in a project. You could start by saying something like, I'm working on the Johnson account, and I've hit a snag with the latest deliverable.
Got it. So you're instantly giving them that background information. Next up is intent.
Right? Intent is about signaling what you need from your audience. Are you delivering good news? Seeking approval, asking for help. Be upfront about your expectations. In this case, you could say, I need your guidance on how to proceed.
Okay, and finally, the key message, the heart of the matter.
Right. This is your one-liner that summarizes your main point. For this scenario, it could be, we might need to adjust the deadline by a week to ensure quality.
Boom, context, intent, key message, all delivered in under 15 seconds. Imagine how different that lunchtime interruption would have been if our colleague had used framing. Instead of 10 minutes of buildup, they could have just gotten straight to the point. Hey, we're testing the LT10 and we're running into an issue that's going to push back the launch date. I need to discuss how to best manage this delay.
Right. It's a total game changer. Fenning even suggests creating a little visual reminder,
Yeah.
a sticky note, or you can print one from his website, with the framing components just to keep them top of mind.
Such a simple but brilliant idea. And it's not just for single topic conversations either. He shows how you can use framing for multiple topics, unexpected questions, presentations, pretty much any work situation you can think of, but framing is only half of the equation. The next tool in Fenning's communication toolkit is what he calls structured summaries.
Yeah, these are good. Structured summaries are like a GPS for navigating those complex work topics. Imagine you need to explain a tangled web of project updates or customer issues or technical details. Structured summary helps you distill all that information into a clear, concise overview that you can deliver in under a minute.
Okay, I'm intrigued. How does this magic formula work?
It's called the GPS method, and it's surprisingly straightforward. First, you define the goal. What are you trying to achieve?
Okay, that makes sense then. What?
Then you outline the problem, what's preventing you from reaching that goal. And finally, you propose a solution. What actions need to be taken?
So it's like a mini problem solving session all wrapped up in a neat little package.
Exactly. And it's important to note that this approach, it subtly shifts the focus from dwelling on the problems to emphasizing solutions. It's about taking a proactive, action-oriented approach to communication.
I like where this is going, but can you give us some real-world examples of how this GPS method works in practice?
Sure. Let's say you're a customer service representative and a prepaid shipment didn't arrive. You need your manager's approval for a refund. Instead of getting lost in the weeds, you could use the GPS method. You'd say something like, the Davison Group prepaid for a shipment last month that didn't arrive, and we need to make this right. The problem is I can't find the shipment, and the refund is above the limit I can approve. So could you authorize the refund and help me find the missing shipment?
Wow, that's so much clearer and more efficient than that whole rambling scenario we talked about earlier. And it's not just for customer service either. Fenning uses examples from IT manufacturing finance. It's like this universal language for untangling complex situations.
It really is.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite tips from the book is this. If you struggle with summarizing on the fly, just write it down. It takes like a minute or two. And it's a game changer for having a smoother, more confident conversation.
I am so guilty of stumbling over my words when I'm trying to explain something complicated. So writing down a structured summary beforehand could be a game changer for me too. But here's something I'm curious about. We've talked about conversations, but how do these techniques apply to other work scenarios, like emails, meetings, presentations?
That's a great question. And we are going to dive into exactly that after a quick break. We'll explore how framing and structured summaries can revolutionize your emails, make your meetings more productive, and even help you ace those job interviews.
I am so ready for this. All right, we'll be right back after the short break.
Welcome back. We were geeking out about framing and structured summaries, which are like these amazing tools for clear communication.
Yeah.
But there's this other layer that Fenning adds that I find really fascinating. It's all about making sure that your message actually lands with your audience.
Huh.
Like, it's one thing to craft like a brilliant message, but if the person on the other end isn't ready or willing to engage, then it's all for nothing.
Right.
We've all experienced those conversations where you're like bursting with this idea, but the person you're talking to just seems like miles away.
Totally.
It's like trying to have a deep conversation with a goldfish. You know, you're pouring your heart out and they're just staring blankly back at you. So how do we avoid those frustrating situations and make sure that we're actually connecting with our audience?
Well, Fenning introduces this technique he calls the validation checkpoint. And you basically build this like quick check-in into your communication to confirm that the other person is actually in a good place to receive your message.
Okay, that makes total sense. But how do we actually do that without being super awkward? Do we just blurt out like, are you paying attention?
There's a more subtle approach. Fenning suggests weaving a simple question into your framing. Something like, is now a good time? Or do you have a few minutes to chat about this?
I love that. It's so polite and direct, and it gives the other person a chance to like bow out gracefully if they're genuinely not in the right headspace, or if they're just slammed with other priorities.
Right, exactly.
Okay, but where exactly do we slip in this validation checkpoint? Do we do it like before or after we've laid out our framed message?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
I think there are pros and cons to both approaches. If you do it right after your framing statement, they can quickly opt out if they're not the right person or they're pressed for time.
True, true.
But on the flip side, they might not have enough information yet to fully grasp the urgency or the importance of what you need to discuss.
Right, because they haven't heard your goal, problem, and solution yet.
Exactly.
Okay, so what's the alternative?
You could also slip it in after you've delivered your structured summary. That way they have the full picture, and they can make a more informed decision about whether they can truly engage.
Okay, so in this scenario, you're front-loading the information. But you do run the risk of potentially trapping them in a longer conversation if they're not actually available. It seems like it comes down to just like reading the room and using your best judgment.
Yeah, for sure. Like if you know your boss is on their way to a big presentation, a quick validation check after your framing is probably the best way to go.
Right.
But if you're looping a colleague in on a less urgent matter, giving them the full structured summary first might make more sense.
It's about being adaptable and tailoring your approach to the specific situation and the person that you're dealing with. But what happens when you're facing a problem and you don't even know who the right person to talk to is?
Yeah, that's a common challenge. I love how Fenning addresses this. He suggests that in these cases, your initial framing and structured summary should actually focus on finding the right contact, rather than diving into the problem itself.
So your goal becomes finding the right person, and your problem is not knowing who that is. That's such a clever reframing. You could frame it by saying something like, I'm working on goal, but I'm not sure who the best person to connect with is on this. Could you point me in the right direction?
Yeah, exactly.
I can see how this could be a game changer for navigating large organizations or complex projects, where it's not always clear who owns what.
Totally.
It's all about adapting those techniques to the specific situation. But what about those times when you realize you're not the right person to help, but you're already stuck in a conversation that's going nowhere?
Oh, I know that feeling.
Yeah.
You're trying to be polite and listen, but, you can't really offer any solutions.
It can be so awkward to try and extract yourself gracefully.
I think Fenning makes a great point here. He says that using clear framing and a validation checkpoint up front can often prevent these situations from happening in the first place.
Right, because if they're not the right person or they're simply not available at that moment, they have the opportunity to politely decline and even suggest someone else who might be better suited to help.
It's exactly. It saves everyone time and avoids that awkward dance of trying to escape a pointless conversation.
Okay, but what if you do need to redirect someone? Fenning gives this example of a colleague who's constantly asking for help with tasks that are outside of your area of expertise.
Oh, yeah.
How do you handle that without being dismissive?
You have to be clear and direct while still being respectful. You acknowledge their request, but you firmly state that you're not the best person to assist them. You could say something like, I understand you're looking for help with tasks, but that's not really something I have experience with.
Yeah.
I recommend reaching out to person or department. They'd be much better equipped to handle this.
So it's about setting boundaries and being helpful, but not taking on responsibilities that don't belong to you.
I love that.
Sure.
So up until now, we've mostly been talking about face-to-face communication. But a huge chunk of our work lives revolves around written communication, especially emails. So how does Fenning suggest we apply these techniques to taming the email beast?
Oh, tell me about it. My inbox is a constant source of stress.
I feel you. Between the never-ending threads and the confusing messages, and like the dreaded reply all chains, it's enough to make you want to chuck your laptop out the window.
I feel your pain, but thankfully Fenning offers a glimmer of hope. And guess what it all starts with? You guessed it, framing. He suggests that your subject line should act as your framing statement, delivering that same powerful trio: context, intent, and key message.
Right, so instead of a vague subject like project update, make it specific and action-oriented, something like project update. Need your input on the revised timeline. Instantly tells the recipient what the email is about and what you need from them.
I'm already seeing how this could revolutionize my inbox, but what about the body of the email itself? Do we just cram all the details in there as usual?
Not quite. For more complex topics, Fenning recommends using the body of your email to present a structured summary. You lay out your goal, problem, and solution in clear, concise bullet points, almost like a mini roadmap for the reader.
It's like taking all the principles we've been discussing and applying them directly to our written communication. So it's not just about shortening our emails, it's about organizing them in a way that makes them easy to digest and act on.
Exactly. Fenning gives a great example of a team leader who needs a priority order decision from a senior manager. So instead of burying the request in paragraphs of text, he uses a structured summary. He clearly outlines the goal the product team needs this critical fix for the website login. The problem is limited resources, meaning another task will have to be delayed. And the solution is the senior manager needs to decide which of these 3 tasks can be pushed back.
That's so much clearer than trying to decipher a rambling email. But do all emails need a structured summary? What about those quick one-line replies or simple status updates?
You're right, not every email requires a formal structured summary. For simple questions, replies within existing threads or feedback emails, a concise framing statement in the subject line and the first line of the email is usually sufficient.
Okay, so it's about matching the level of detail to the complexity of the message. But let's talk about those dreaded email chains that seem to just spiral out of control. You know, the ones where the original purpose gets lost in a sea of replies and everyone's CC'd for no reason. How do we escape those black holes of communication?
Ah, yes, the email black hole. Fenning suggests this brilliant strategy for regaining control. If a chain has become confusing or unproductive, you hit the reset button. You reply with a message that clearly outlines the goal, the problem, and the solution.
It's like you're stepping in as the email conductor, bringing order to the chaos and getting everyone back on track.
Exactly. You could say something like, I've been following this discussion, but I want to make sure we're all on the same page. Can you confirm if the summary is accurate? Goal. Your understanding of the goal. Problem. Your understanding of the problem. Solution. Your understanding of the solution.
I love that. It's proactive, it's clear, and it helps avoid any further confusion down the line. But what about when you need to forward an email chain to someone new? Should you just hit forward and let them figure it out?
Fetting is adamant that forwarding email chains without a summary is a huge communication no-no. It's like dumping a stack of papers on someone's desk and saying, read this,
Yeah.
without any context or explanation.
You're so right. I'm totally guilty of doing that in the past. I never thought of it that way. But you're right. It puts the burden on the recipient to try to decipher everything.
Exactly. Fetting emphasizes that whenever you bring someone new into the loop, you need to treat it as a fresh start. Give them the background. Explain why you're forwarding it to them. Highlight the key information that they need to know. And summarize the relevant points from the chain.
It's like writing a mini briefing to get them up to speed.
Right.
So it doesn't matter if you're forwarding for information or escalation or a specific question, always include that crucial summary. But what about those emails that are inherently long and complex? Is there a way to make them less daunting?
Yeah. Fenning acknowledges that sometimes a lengthy email is unavoidable. But he stresses that even those behemoths should be structured in a way that makes them easy to digest.
So it's not just about trying to make the email shorter, it's about organizing the information effectively.
Exactly. He suggests using headings and bullet points and white space to break up those big chunks of text and make the information more visually appealing. And guess what? The framing and structured summary techniques can actually provide the framework for doing just that.
I see what you're saying. Your key message becomes a heading, and your goal, problem, and solution naturally lend themselves to bullet points. It's like built-in formatting guidelines for a clear and concise email. But what about those work scenarios that don't neatly fit into a conversation or an email format? Things like meetings presentations or those unexpected questions that come out of left field.
Yeah, good point. Fenning has got us covered there, too. He emphasizes that the principles of framing and structured summaries are adaptable to like a wide range of situations. It's about understanding the core concepts and then getting creative with how you apply them.
It's like having a set of communication power tools that you can use in all sorts of scenarios. For example, how would we use framing for something like a meeting invitation?
Oh, that's a good one. Fenning suggests a slight twist on the framing formula for meetings. Instead of the key message, he recommends including two elements, meeting purpose and meeting output.
Interesting. So instead of one overarching key message, you're providing two more specific statements that clarify the objectives of the meeting.
Right.
Can you give us an example?
Sure. Instead of a generic subject like team meeting, you'd have something like team meeting, brainstorm marketing campaign ideas, meeting output, list of potential campaign themes and target audiences.
I love that. It sets clear expectations, and it lets attendees know exactly what they're walking into. And you could even include a structured summary in the body of the invitation to provide a more detailed overview if needed.
Exactly. The goal is to provide that clarity and set the stage for a productive meeting right from the invitation.
But how do we keep that momentum going once the meeting actually starts? How do we ensure those first few minutes are engaging and focused?
Well, according to Fenning, you kick things off by clearly restating the meeting purpose and output.
Okay.
It might seem redundant since it's in the invitation, but it reinforces those objectives and sets the tone for a focused discussion.
It only takes a few seconds, but it can significantly improve the meeting's effectiveness.
And once you've reiterated the purpose and output, you can launch into your structured summary, outlining the goal, the problem, and the proposed solution.
It's like giving everyone that mental roadmap for the discussion. But Fetting also points out that there are some additional benefits to starting a meeting with a structured summary.
Oh yeah, for sure. It allows for clarification and validation. Attendees have the opportunity to ask questions and make sure they fully understand the situation before you dive into like all the nitty-gritty details.
That's so valuable. It prevents those misunderstandings and ensures that everyone is on the same page from the start.
And Fenning also mentions that starting with a structured summary can actually help calm nerves, especially if you're the one leading the meeting.
Oh, yeah. Having a clear roadmap to follow can definitely boost confidence.
Yeah.
And reduce anxiety.
And by focusing on the solution right from the get-go, you're minimizing the time spent dwelling on problems or getting bogged down in the historical details. It's all about directing the energy toward action and progress.
Speaking of avoiding time wasting, what about when someone forwards you a meeting invitation without any context or explanation? Is that another communication faux pas?
Oh, absolutely. Fenning is just as adamant about this as he is about forwarding emails without summaries. Sending a blank or unclear meeting invitation is a major no-no. It's just disrespectful of the recipient's time.
Yeah.
And it forces them to scramble for information.
It's the meeting equivalent of the dreaded email chain forward without any explanation.
Exactly.
No one wants to be left wondering why they're even invited.
Right.
So always take a moment to provide a clear summary when forwarding meeting invitations, just as you would with emails. But what about those times when you're put on the spot and asked a question unexpectedly?
Oh, yeah.
Whether it's in a meeting or a casual conversation or even a job interview, those moments can be so nerve-wracking.
Totally, your mind goes blank.
Start rambling.
You're just hoping to stumble upon a coherent answer.
Is there a way to use these techniques to avoid those awkward fumbles?
Thankfully, yes. Fenning says that even in those unexpected moments, the principles of framing and structured summaries can come to your rescue. So instead of panicking, just take a deep breath and mentally walk through the framing components and the GPS method.
It's like having a mental checklist to guide your response.
Right.
So instead of freezing up, you can
Yeah.
use that mental framework to structure your answer.
Exactly. Start by framing your answer to clarify or reinforce the question you were asked. For instance, if your manager asks, "Can you tell us what caused sales to be lower than expected this month?" You could respond with, "Sales were lower than expected this month because key message." To give you a bit more context, our goal was goal, but we encountered problem. We're addressing this by solution.
That's a great way to take control of the situation and present a clear and concise answer. And I love how it shifts the focus towards solutions rather than dwelling on the negative.
Right, and Fenning emphasizes that using structured summaries in these situations can actually help you avoid getting defensive or making excuses. It allows you to deliver the information in this calm, objective, solution-oriented way, which is especially important in high-pressure situations like job interviews.
Speaking of job interviews, I'm curious how Fenning suggests we apply these techniques to those make-or-break conversations.
He actually dedicates a whole section of the first minute to mastering communication in interview settings. And he highlights how structured summaries can be incredibly effective when answering those dreaded behavioral questions.
You know, the ones like, tell me about a time you faced a challenge, or give an example of a time you had to work under pressure.
Exactly. So instead of launching into a rambling anecdote, you can use framing and the GPS method to structure your response. You start by framing your answer using the context, intent, and key message, and then deliver a concise, structured summary, outlining the goal you were trying to achieve, the problem you encountered, and the solution you implemented. It helps you showcase your skills and experience in this really clear, concise, and compelling way.
It's like having a secret weapon for delivering impactful interview responses. But before we wrap up this section, I want to touch on another communication channel that's become ubiquitous in the workplace. Instant messaging.
Oh, yeah.
With platforms like Slack, Microsoft Teams, and countless others, we're constantly bombarded with messages. So do the principles of framing and structured summaries still apply in these fast-paced, informal settings?
Absolutely. Fenning emphasizes that clear communication is just as important in instant messaging as it is in emails or face-to-face interactions. He encourages us to use those same framing techniques, using the first few lines of our message to establish the context, intent, and key message.
So instead of firing off a quick "hey" or jumping right into a question, we should take a moment to set the stage, even in those quick "I am" exchanges.
Exactly. For
Yeah.
example, instead of just shooting off a question, you could say, "Hey, colleagues named, quick question about topic. I'm trying to goal, but I'm running into problem. Do you have a minute to chat?"
That's so much more thoughtful and considerate
Yeah.
than just lobbing a random question at someone. And
Uh-huh.
for more complex issues, you could even use bullet points to outline your goal, problem, and solution, just like you would in an email.
Exactly.
And even in those seemingly informal instant message conversations, don't forget the validation checkpoint. It's always a good idea to check if the person is available or has the time to discuss the topic before you launch into a detailed explanation.
All that respect.
It all comes back to being respectful of people's time and workflow, regardless of the communication channel. I love how Fenning brings it all together. Clear and concise communication isn't just for formal settings. It's essential in every aspect of our work lives, from those quick IMs to boardroom presentations.
I couldn't agree more. Fenning's message is all about empowering us to communicate more effectively in every situation. But before we move on to the final part of our deep dive, I want to emphasize one final point that Fenning stresses throughout the book. Practice, practice, practice.
Yes. It's so tempting to think that we can just absorb these concepts and instantly become communication masters. But like any skill, it takes time and effort to really integrate them into our everyday habits.
Exactly. Fenning acknowledges that putting these techniques into practice takes effort and repetition. Initially, he suggests like writing out your framing and structured summaries
Mm.
before conversations or emails, almost like having a script to
The
follow,
training wheels, when
right?
you're learning to ride a bike. Eventually, you won't need them, but they're so helpful in the beginning.
And over time, as you use these techniques more and more, you'll find that you naturally start to think in terms of context, intent, key message, goal, problem, and solution. It becomes second nature.
It's about retraining your brain to approach communication in a more structured and deliberate way. But what about those times when we find ourselves slipping back into old habits? Like when we're stressed or rushed or just not thinking clearly?
Yeah, Fenning offers this great tip for those moments. Write it down. He emphasizes that taking even just a minute or two to jot down your framing and structured summary can make all the difference in ensuring a clear and concise message.
It's like having a cheat sheet to help you stay focused and on track.
Exactly. And it's especially helpful when you're dealing with a complex topic or a high-stakes conversation. And don't underestimate the power of those visual reminders either. A simple sticky note with the framing components or the GPS method on your desk or your laptop can be surprisingly effective in keeping those principles top of mind.
I love that idea. But ultimately, the key to success is to be patient with yourself and embrace the process. It's about making small changes over time and celebrating those wins along the way.
It's a journey, not a destination. And every interaction, no matter how small, is an opportunity to practice and refine these skills.
That's a great reminder. Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground in this part of our deep dive. We've explored how to make our emails clearer, our meetings more productive, and even how to handle those unexpected questions that life throws our way. But we're not done yet. When we return, we'll wrap up our exploration of the first minute and discuss some key takeaways and actionable steps for applying these powerful communication techniques in our own work lives. Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into the first minute. I don't know about you, but I feel like my brain is like overflowing with all these new insights.
Right.
We've covered so much from those practical framing techniques to like the art of crafting those laser focused emails and leading more effective meetings. So now I think it's time to like distill all this amazing information into some key takeaways and those actionable steps
Yeah.
that you can start using like right away.
Yeah, it's been quite the journey. I mean, we've tackled everything from those awkward conversations that just seem to go nowhere to the dreaded email black hole. But one of the most powerful themes that I think emerges from the first minute is this idea of shifting our focus from problems to solutions.
You know, I was thinking the same thing. Fenning really hammers home this point throughout the book. And it's such a simple but profound shift in mindset. By consciously structuring our communication around goals, problems, and solutions, we're essentially like rewiring our brains to
Mhm.
think and speak in a more proactive and action-oriented way.
It's like we're taking control of the narrative and steering the conversation in a more positive and productive direction. And I think that shift can have like this ripple effect on the entire work environment. Instead of getting bogged down in negativity or blame, we're creating a culture of solution seeking and collaboration.
Yes. I love that. It's not just about becoming a better communicator, it's about like fostering a more positive and productive work culture. But okay, let's get down to brass tacks.
Yeah.
What are some concrete steps that our listeners can take to start implementing these techniques in their own work lives? Like, where should they begin?
I always recommend starting small. Pick one technique that resonates with you,
Mm.
whether it's framing structured summaries or that brilliant validation checkpoint, and just focus on mastering that one thing. Don't try to like overhaul your entire communication style overnight.
Such great advice. It's about building those communication muscles gradually, one step at a time. And like any skill, the key is practice, practice, practice.
Exactly.
The more you use these techniques, the more natural they'll become.
It's about weaving these principles into your everyday communication habits.
But I think we all have those moments
Right.
where we slip back into those old patterns, especially when we're feeling stressed or overwhelmed.
Yeah.
So, what do you suggest for those times when we kind of find ourselves backsliding?
Well, I think Fenning's advice about writing it down is pure gold, even if it feels a little clunky at first. Taking a few minutes to jot down your framing statement or your structured summary can make a world of difference in ensuring that clarity and conciseness.
It's like having that cheat sheet to keep you on track and prevent those rambling tangents.
Right, and those visual reminders we talked about can be really helpful too, like a sticky note with the framing components or the GPS method, on your desk or your laptop, can serve as this constant nudge to stay focused and on message.
I love those visual cues. But I think ultimately, the most important thing is to be patient with yourself and embrace the process. It's a journey, not a destination.
Absolutely.
Every interaction, whether it's a quick email or a high-stakes presentation, is an opportunity to practice and refine these skills.
I couldn't agree more.
Right.
And if you ever find yourself struggling, don't hesitate to revisit the first minute. It's a treasure trove of practical wisdom and inspiration.
It's a game changer for sure. We highly recommend adding it to your communication toolkit. Well, as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with this final empowering thought. Clear communication is a superpower. It can transform your work life, strengthen your relationships, and ultimately help you achieve your goals.
It's about taking control of your message and making sure it lands with impact.
So go forth and communicate with confidence. Remember, the first minute is just the beginning of a more fulfilling and productive work experience.
Until next time, happy communicating.